This is the lecture preparation for the fifth Sunday of Easter, April 24th, 2016. We continue again from the books of the Acts of the Apostles and the Revelation. And so this is actually the fifth of the 8 consecutive weeks reading from Acts. I'm on page 165 in our lector book. So in this passage, this is telling the story of the missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas. And on the recording I'm sending you, I have a picture there, and it's got their map, and you'll see that hopefully you're just looking at it right now. And he's talking about all these cities. There's Lystra, Iconium, Antioch, etc. Just to give you an idea, I gotta just to get an idea of what the distances are. When he sailed from, he went to Atalia and then to Antioch. Yeah, when he went to Atalia to Antioch, you can see he went in the Mediterranean there, just north of Cyprus. That's about 300 miles by ship, and we're not talking a holiday cruiser. You know, this was a relatively small sailing ship, but 300 miles. Okay, and then so those distances between Iconium and Antioch, I'm going to estimate those to be 50 to 60 miles. So this is not a weekend tour of the wine vineyards in California or something. This is a big area, and he went a long distance. So when you're reading the names of these cities like Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, for one thing, make sure that you can pronounce them. These are all pretty simple to pronounce, but make sure that they feel comfortable. But when you say those cities like Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, those don't really mean anything to you. So it's easy just to kind of read them as a list of like ingredients that go into your Campbell soup or something. But that meant something to these people. It's kind of like saying, he was in New York, and then he went to Boston, and then he went back down to Washington D.C. and these were all cities and places that they knew, and it was significant to them for various reasons that they did that. So make sure that is reflected in your voice. In the commentary below on the second column, it says that Paul and Barnabas had visited Lystra before, and Paul left it barely alive. His healing of a cripple was used by his enemies to persuade the people to stone him. So they almost killed him, but he went back. Not for revenge, but to ensure his recent converts are growing and thriving. So Paul knows what he speaks about when he says hardships are necessary. That's in the middle of the first reading. Speak of the spread of our faith with joy, realizing each city represents a place where people risk their reputations and their lives for that faith, and take pride that so many generously responded to God's generous initiative. Okay. A reading from the Acts of the Apostles. After Paul and Barnabas had proclaimed the good news to that city and made a considerable number of disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch. They strengthened the spirits of the disciples and exhorted them to persevere in the faith, saying, "It is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." They appointed elders for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting commended them to the Lord, in whom they had put their faith. Then they traveled through Pisidia and reached Pamphylia. After proclaiming the word at Perga, they went down to Atalia. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they were commended to the grace of God for the work they had now accomplished. And when they arrived, they called the church together and reported what God had done with them, and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So Antioch was kind of their home base, and so they went on this missionary trip, and they came back to their parish, to their church, and gave a report. Must have been an exciting time. So, moving on to the next page. I'm on page 166 in your workbook. I want you to look at the upper left part of your book. It says, to keep in mind, using the microphone. Know the public address system. If it echoes, speak even more slowly. In other words, if you're in a room, we're in our room. It is what it is. Our room has some echo. It's not like a big, long, tall stone church where there's a lot of echo. We don't have a lot of echo. But there is some, and when you speak in a place that has echo, you have to speak slowly because you have to let the sound of the words to reverberate. Otherwise, they get all jumbled together. So that's one of the reasons why we always talk to people. When we talk to people about reading, we ask them to read slowly, and that's one of the main reasons, is because of the echo in the church. Another thing they talk about here is if you hear popping, that means you're probably too close to the microphone. And the word they use, popping, I believe it's called onomatopoeia, where the word sounds like what it actually is. So pop. When you say a P sound, you get a pop. If you say a B sound, you also get a pop. If you say T, you get a pop. And some of the other ones too, not as much. These are called plosives, where you have a little tiny explosion of air in your mouth, like B, D, K. Those have a little air, and those will pop. The microphone we have is pretty sensitive, and while it has a tiny little screen on there, it's not enough to really block a lot of air coming in your mouth. So, point being, if you're hearing popping, that means you're too close. Okay, so back off a little bit. The mic is strong, and but it would be much better and actually much more effective if you just speak louder and clearer than if you go up to the mic and speak softly. So, if you hear that, it sounds like a little explosion, then that's you doing that. Don't do that. Okay, so we're going to read from the book of Revelation. Remember, this is a vision, not a scene outside the bus window. Give it a sense of wonder and persuade us that what you describe is indeed possible. So this is not just describing something commonplace, but something very special. I'm looking at the bottom here in the first paragraph. It says, the book of Revelation was written not to reframe current realities like motivational speakers do, but to tell us that reality is already different from what it seems. So it's a whole different, not just a different perspective, but it's describing something very different from what we are experiencing. I'll go ahead and read this. A reading from the book of Revelation. Then I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former earth and the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, God's dwelling is with the human race. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will always be with them as their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning, wailing or pain, for the old order has passed away. The one who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. The word of the Lord. Okay, I'm now on page 167. To keep in mind, there talks about three types of content. There's intellectual - theological. The second is emotional, and the third aesthetic. Basically, the intellectual, theological, the plot, and then the story, and the teaching that's behind them, that is the intellectual theological content. That's what we usually think of. However, another type of content is the emotional, and it's the idea, the feelings that are going on behind there. And then the other is the aesthetic content, and this would have to do with the repetition or the drama or perhaps the apocryphal style, or whatever. This kind of gives it just a certain aesthetic. Some of the readings are poems, and some are just narratives. So the gospel reading is from John, and it says, "Now that the betrayer is gone, Jesus can speak about saving events this treachery will set in motion. Speak not with disappointment, but with joy and hope." There is a sense of urgency and immediacy in these lines. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. I know that most of you have gotten your new programs, your schedules, and I hope that's working out for you. Have gotten mostly good comments, and there have been some questions, and there have been a couple of things that have been corrected, but by and large it's going well. Of course, the main thing is your participation in this, and you're entering your unavailable dates through the website yourself, and your ability to find substitutes online, and hopefully you'll be able to figure that out. We're putting together a training session in, I have the date actually, in May. It's not set in concrete, but right now we're looking at May 10th. It's a Tuesday night, in which case we can go over the new program and just talk about our wonderful ministry of proclamation which we have, and hopefully you can all be there. It'll be in the evening, probably 6:30 or 7. Again, I haven't firmed it up yet, but it'd be on May 10th, so plan on being there. God bless all of you.